Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Ryan Olson, and I'm a senior fellow here at the Frontier Europe Initiative at MEI. And I'm pleased to welcome you to today's event, Economic Development and Security, the Three Seas Initiative in the Black Sea. At Frontier Europe Initiative, we explore the growing energy, trade, and security and political relationships in the Black Sea and their broader implications for the US, Europe, and the Middle East. Today, we are excited to be hosting a timely panel on economic development and security in the region, with a focus on the Three Seas Initiative. I'll be moderating the panel, and joining me, we have three excellent participants who I hope will help us deepen our understanding of connectivity and security issues in the region. The Three Seas Initiative is a timely and ambitious multilateral effort amongst 12 Central and Eastern European countries with participation from the United States that seeks to enhance connectivity, rebalance infrastructure ties to improve north to south connections, and help close the development gap between East and West. The initiative also has critical security implications as regional leaders look for opportunities to improve economic and physical security as Russia's presence and aggression looms and China's aspirations grow. Meanwhile, further afield, NATO allies and security partners in the Black Sea Basin, including Turkey, Ukraine, and Georgia, have expressed interest in the program as a way to promote economic development and enhance existing political, economic, and security relationships. Joining me today for the discussion on these topics are three excellent panelists, and I hope, honestly, to learn a lot from them. First, we will hear from Ian Brzezinski, who is the resident fellow at the Atlantic Council and former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Europe and NATO policy. Ian is arguably one of the earliest in Washington to recognize the opportunity and importance of the Three Seas Initiative and has been a critical voice for increased US engagement in the project. Ian has more than 2 decades of experience in US national security matters and has served as senior policy positions at the Department of Defense and the US Congress. He also currently leads the Brzezinski Group. Following Ian, we'll hear from our very own Dr. Yulia Joja, who will help us provide some insights into the broader regional security implications of the initiative and the implications for Black Sea states like Bulgaria and Romania. Yulia is a senior fellow here at the Middle East Institute's Frontier Europe Initiative and also an adjunct professor at Georgetown. Lastly, we'll hear from Dr. Mamuka Seratelli, who is joining us this morning from Georgia. Mamuka is a non-resident fellow here at Frontier Europe and also serves as a senior fellow at the Central Asia Caucasus Institute at the American Foreign Policy Council. Mamuka has more than 30 years of experience in academia and diplomacy and business development in the Black Sea Caspian region, and he will give us some perspective on the Three Seas Initiative and its implications for Georgia and Ukraine and connectivity in the broader region. I hope this event can be in discussion, so what I'd like to do is throw it over to our panelists to start out with, hear some short remarks from them, and then open up the floor to a broader discussion with some Q&A. If you are interested in submitting a question to our panelists, you can do so using the Zoom Q&A function, which is right there at the bottom of your screen, or you can send us an email at events@mei.edu. Feel free to ask questions throughout the panel. I'll try to incorporate them as best as I can into the discussion so we can keep this as lively as possible. To start out with, I'd like to turn it over to Ian. If you could just tell us a little bit about what Three Seas is, why it's so important for Central and Eastern European governments, what the US role is, and perhaps give us a little bit of a readout from last week's summit.
Ryan, thank you very much. Thanks to you for those kind words of introduction. Yulia and the Middle East Institute, thanks for hosting this gathering and including me and giving me an opportunity to update you all on the Three Seas Initiative. And Mamuka, it's good to be on a panel with you. What is the Three Seas Initiative? The Three Seas Initiative is a Central European initiated and led effort to accelerate the development of cross-border energy, transport, and digital infrastructure in the region between the Baltic, Black, and Adriatic Seas, the Three Seas. Its membership are 12 EU member states, the 3 Baltic states, Poland, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, Austria, Slovenia, Croatia, Bulgaria, and Romania. And the goal is to overcome a legacy lingering from decades of Soviet occupation prior to the end of the Cold War, a legacy that impedes economic development and cohesion. It's an infrastructural legacy, especially when it comes down to north-south corridors, transport corridors in the Three Seas region. If you sat on a satellite and looked down on Europe, and you looked over to the west, you'd see a spider web of cross-cutting highways, roads, pipelines, canals, and such. And at risk of being hyperbolic, you look over at Central and Eastern Europe and it's rather Spartan, except for a few east-west major corridors. And that's a problem. Today, the European Commission estimates that road and rail travel in Central Europe, 30 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall, still takes 2 to 4 times longer than comparable travel in the EU-15, the EU-15, Western Europe. The goal of 3Cs is to stimulate economic growth by leveraging the power of infrastructure. It's to strengthen economic resilience, including energy security through the diversification of energy supplies, pipelines linking to LNG terminals on coastlines and such. It's all about completing the vision of a Europe that's undivided, free, prosperous, and secure. And that's what makes me excited about the 3Cs initiative. It's not a request for financial assistance. It's in fact a leveraging by these Central European democracies, by these EU member states, of their geoeconomic potential to attract private capital to spur infrastructure development that will benefit not only their region, but all of Europe, indeed the transatlantic community as a whole. Working together, the 3Cs nations are actualizing the power and potential of their region. Acting individually or alone, these individual Central European states are somewhat limited in their ability to attract capital. But together, the 3Cs nations constitute 111 million people and a combined GDP of about $1.7 trillion. That combined geoeconomic power is significant, and it has potential to generate real substantial interest from the private sector, from private capital around the world. A central element of the initiative is the 3Cs Initiative Investment Fund. And this fund will direct capital to jumpstart long overdue multinational infrastructure projects in the 3Cs region. It's launched, it's up and running, and it's been launched with capital invested by the governments of the 3Cs member states. It runs on a purely commercial basis, making investments without political interference, even from the government shareholders, into regional projects that promise commercially competitive rates of return. The fund is managed by Amber Infrastructure Group. It's actually a US-owned but London-based company established, I think, in 2006. It's got long experience in managing multinational infrastructure projects. 9 of the 12 3C states have invested in this fund. It right now has a total committed capital base of $1.4 billion and aims to build that up to $3 to $5 billion. And right now the fund is reaching out to IFI, sovereign wealth funds, and commercial sources of capital. This fund promises to be a powerful beacon that will highlight the economic potential of Central Europe and enable the region to more effectively tap into the more than $1 trillion in FDI and foreign direct investment capital that's circulating the globe each year, $1 trillion seeking opportunities for secure and profitable returns. The establishment of this commercially managed fund that will be free from political interference, I think, is a profound demonstration of self-confidence by these nations. They're actually investing their own money and parking it under commercial management to make a profit. So why will it succeed? I think these countries have every right to be self-confident in this undertaking. The 3Cs region is a vibrant region that offers immense opportunity to investors, especially in the infrastructure domain. There's approximately a $500 to $600 trillion infrastructure deficit that needs to be addressed. This is a region with 111 million people who are well educated and energetic, combined GDP of, I said, $1.7 trillion before virus hit. They have the regulatory stability that comes with EU membership. Prior to COVID, they had a growth rate over the prior 5 years of about 3% that was projected to be more than 3% out to 2030. You know, if they build with a $500 billion infrastructure deficit of highways and roads and pipelines, if something is built in that region in the right place in the right way, it's going to be profitable. But where else do you get the investment stability of the developed world, these are EU member states, with growth rates that kind of match areas of the developing world? It's a good deal. So last week, on October 19th, they had the 5th 3C Summit and Business Forum. It was actually a virtual leaders meeting and a web forum because of the COVID. They convened the heads of state from the 12 3Cs countries, as well as key officials from the United States, Germany, and the European Commission. It was COVID hit too. Steinmeier, the president of Germany, was supposed to attend, but got quarantined. But he was represented by a senior official from the foreign ministry. The European Commission was represented by the executive vice president, Margrethe Vestager, who really emphasized the digital side of digital potential of the region, talking about 5G corridors and such. And the United States had a really robust delegation that includes Secretary Pompeo, who participated in the summit meeting, Deputy Secretary of Energy Mark Menendez, and Undersecretary of State for Economic Growth, Energy, and Environment, Keith Crack. I had 4 or 5 key takeaways from the summit, and I'll be quick. First, it underscored Central European commitment to the 3Cs initiative. It's strong. As I mentioned, 9 of the countries are investing in the fund. I think actually we're on the verge of 10 and probably get 11. It was a strong expression. It featured a strong expression of support by both Commission, Executive Vice President Vestager from the EU Commission and from the German government. They underscored that they see the 3Cs initiative as consistent and complementary to the European Union's efforts to help develop the region. Third, the United States operationalized at the summit its $1 billion pledge. In last February, Secretary of State Pompeo said the United States was prepared to invest up to $1 billion into the 3Cs initiative. At the summit, the United States announced a $300 million investment into the 3Cs fund. That investment fund will be formalized at a development finance corporation meeting in December. This is significant financially and politically. It will resonate in capital markets, giving more credibility to the whole initiative. And the US delegation emphasized that the US $1 billion pledge is still operational, it's still open. So if the 3Cs fund continues to grow, it could get even more US capital. And I would add, there's strong bipartisan support for 3Cs in Washington. Fourth, the 3Cs fund was highlighted as being real and operational. It made its first investment last week in the transport sector. It expects to make investments in the energy, transport, and digital projects sectors by year end. And as I mentioned, it's running into the new year with $1.4 billion in committed capital. The fifth highlight is that Bulgaria, Black Sea region country, will host the next 3C Summit and Business Forum, probably in June 2021. So let me close just by making this point. This is an exciting initiative in which Central European nations are leveraging their economic potential to create economic and strategic value for the transatlantic community. It's an innovative way to attract and leverage private sector capital to promote development in their region. It's an approach that's only become more urgent in this time of COVID, because the COVID crisis and its economic consequences have underscored the essentialness of connectivity, underscored by the fact we're on Zoom today. And we need economic growth to be stimulated, and infrastructure development is a great way to do that. The summit capped a year that marked the initiative going operational, and 3Cs will enter 2021, I'm confident, with real momentum. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. I want to turn it over to Yulia now. President Trump and the Trump administration have really emphasized regional energy security as a component of this, and I think it's a critical, it has been a critical topic for how we address energy security and Eastern European dependence on Russian natural gas. I was wondering if you give us some perspective on how this kind of fits into that framework, and then broader US and NATO strategy for the region, if there is one, and then kind of what are the some of the motivations and perspectives from Bulgaria and Romania that are on the Black Sea.
Thank you, Ryan. Yes, with pleasure. So if we look at the 3Cs initiative over the last few years, the focus has been from the outset not on security, but on economic development, energy infrastructure development, etc. The security dimension of the 3Cs initiative, though not the focus of the initiative, I would argue, though, is crucial. Three Seas initiative includes the entire eastern flank, including those EU and NATO member states with a heightened threat perception of Russia, that is the Baltics, Poland, and Romania. Geographically, these states are also underdeveloped, as Ian mentioned a bit earlier, in terms of critical infrastructure, roads, railroads, ports, digital, etc. They are also not connected to each other very well, the Baltic with the Black Sea, for instance. And this is crucial from a security perspective because of NATO's defense particularly. In case of an aggression of on NATO's eastern flank, which is NATO's most vulnerable region, the alliance's core defense capabilities have been based so far in Western Europe, most notably Germany. So in case of an attack, NATO's contingency plans are used to move military capabilities from the west to the east. And this, by the way, takes weeks. So far, NATO has not based anything other than non-permanent military tripwires, I would argue, in the Baltic Sea, and even less so in the Black Sea. And now this is starting to change, and the Three Seas initiative seems to go hand in hand with the redistribution of American troops in Europe, as we've seen discussions over the last few months. This is why critical infrastructure and interconnectivity of the Three Seas initiative are so crucial to Eastern European security, because in the end, they reduce the duration of executing contingency plans potentially, and because they really connect the Baltic to the Black Sea. Via Carpathia is maybe the most prominent project from the outset of the Three Seas initiative. That is a road, a highway that connects the Baltics to the Black Sea via Romania, all the way to the Aegean, ending in Istanbul. And over the last few months, we've seen it very vocally supported also by the United States. But in light of the US troop distribution away from Germany and into rotational non-permanent forces in the Baltic and hopefully in the Black Sea, this increases the eastern flank's deterrence, gives more flexibility to NATO's defense posture, and enables greater eastern flank solidarity. And solidarity is something generally underrated in security, but vital in the specific case of NATO. Linking the Black Sea with the Baltic Sea will significantly contribute to a whole of flank approach in terms of deterrence, and increased Eastern interconnectedness through critical infrastructure building of that also reduces reliance on Western Europe, which of course has also implications on the alliance, but we can go into that a bit later if there's questions. I do want to say one thing. From the outset, the Three Seas initiative has been perceived in Europe as a potential American alternative to the EU. You can see that following the recent summit reflected, particularly in European media, in a pretty obvious way. The EU has pledged enormous funding to the Three Seas initiative, which yet has to be concretized and could still be withdrawn due to the economic crisis we're facing right now. So far, the Three Seas initiative reflects the development gap within the EU, and in a sense, it's a failure of the EU to reduce that gap so much that Three Seas initiative is becoming necessary. Another way Three Seas initiative adds to security in the region, also you mentioned that, Ryan and Ian, both of you, is through energy. And this goes back to internal EU and NATO divisions as well. Over the last few years, we've seen continuously increasing tensions within the EU, which is supposed to regulate and provide for energy security. But we've seen more divisions on energy resources and diversification. And particularly since the 2014 annexation and war in Ukraine, Eastern Europeans have made tremendous efforts to reduce their dependency on Russian energy sources, while at the same time supporting Ukraine as a key transit country. At the same time, Central European countries, most prominently Germany, have developed their cooperation with Gazprom for cheap gas prices and continue to do so. And now we see that the United States has actively stepped in, into this discussion, offering American LNG as an alternative to alternative source to sell their product, but also to contribute to energy diversification in Eastern Europe. Now the US sells actually cheaper gas in Poland through LNG than Russian gas through pipelines. And this all culminates, I would argue, in the Nord Stream 2 pipeline and the discussions around that, which are opposed. The Nord Stream 2 pipeline is opposed by Eastern European countries and the United States. And the culmination we see now with German, Dutch, French companies being placed under American sanctions for working with Gazprom. And the Three Seas recent summit declarations name actually Nord Stream 2 and Turk Stream as threats to European energy security. Eastern European countries are making huge steps, as I mentioned, to reduce their dependency on Russian energy through LNG ports and other alternatives, but also through the development of nuclear energy, particularly in Romania and Poland. And here too, we see an imbalance between security provided in the Baltic Sea on one side and in the Black Sea on the other side, though the Black Sea is far more threatened through Russia's aggressive actions over the last few years. However, the biggest piece of good news for the Black Sea over the last few months has been, or weeks, has been a pledge by the United States to Romania of $8 billion for the further development of Romania's nuclear plant. This aid comes with the clear expectation from the United States for Romania, that is, by the way, the only Eastern European country that is energetically independent, to aid through energy interconnectedness other countries in the region, so that Romania plays a bigger regional stability role. And at the same time, Poland will get likely a brand new nuclear power plant in cooperation with the Americans worth $20 billion. So we see that nuclear aspect feeding into energy security as well. Now, this all speaks to what the declarations from the American side reflect as a security point of view. And it is also reflected as such in the media, as I mentioned earlier, that the US is buying into Three Seas initiative, or that its buy-in targets reducing the influence of Russia in China and in Eastern Europe. And for Eastern Europeans, it's a way to develop regionally. But there are two security problems here, and maybe we can go into these depending on where the conversation goes to later. The first one is that there's no consensus on Russia among Three Seas Initiative member states. Hence, the Three Seas Initiative will stay economical. And this is clear. This is, I would argue, a contradiction with the American view, as I mentioned it a bit earlier, that the United States buy-in consists of up to 300 million matching 1-to-1 parity. So if Three Seas members put collectively 50 million in, this is what the US will put in. We have seen recently State Secretary Pompeo's visit to Slovakia and Hungary, countries who don't share the same threat perception that Poland, Romania, and the Baltics have. So it will be a question for Central European countries of what projects the United States will perceive as adequate in the framework of great power competition in these countries. And the second thing, and with this I will close, is why the Three Seas initiative has to stay within EU membership remits, and whether it should, given the United States and Eastern flank countries' emphasis on building security, to reduce dependency on Russia. Ukraine, we've seen very visibly, wants to join the Three Seas initiative supported by Poland. Given the infrastructure gap in the eastern space, particularly in Ukraine and Georgia, it makes sense to explore private and perhaps even public partnerships and investment projects that expand into this space of Ukraine and Georgia. But we've seen at the Three Seas Initiative Summit a few days ago, the Estonian president who was chairing the summit, responding to likely to the Ukraine proposal from President Zelensky with the support of Poland's President Duda by proposing similar funds, including for the Western Balkans. So for the years to come, we will see whether such a proposal makes sense of the Estonian president, or whether there is political will to further develop this fund to address Russia's and China's rising influence in Eastern Europe and help Eastern Europe beyond EU borders reduce their interconnectivity gap. Thank you.
Thanks, Julia. Yeah, certainly Ukraine and Georgia and perhaps even Turkey are right now on the outside looking in, despite the fact that, if you look at the 48 or so priority projects, Ukraine and Georgia are mentioned in a few of those. So, and there's obvious real alignments with national infrastructure strategies in both of those countries. To give us some more perspective on those countries, I'd like to turn it now to Mamuka and to give us some idea of how the Three Seas Initiative fits into Ukraine and Georgia's kind of regional infrastructure strategy, and what are the prospects for other Black Sea countries to join the Three Seas Initiative. It doesn't seem super clear to me how that's going to happen logistically, but I think that there's a lot of promise there and potentially some political will as well. So Mamuka, let me turn it over to you.
Thanks, Ryan. Let me start also by reflecting a little bit about the summit last week. I think it's essential to remind our audience that this summit that took place in Tallinn actually made significant progress in making clear that the commitment of 12 countries members of this initiative is strong, and some of the countries are definitely acting as the leaders of initiative. Poland committed additional $250 billion to investment fund, which is very significant. Poland being the clear leader in this commitments to this fund with $750 billion, which is clearly a major step forward. But I would like to reflect on a few other points. So, which was actually points that were made by different speakers at the summit, and which has some implications for region that we are focused on, Black Sea region right now. So point number one, the connectivity is needed to boost economic development, growth, and at the same time to strengthen sovereignty of countries, because of the Soviet legacy, a lot of these countries are dependent on energy and other resources coming from one particular source, Russia, with a frequently tense relationship. So by making infrastructure connections with different sources of resources, it strengthens economic sovereignty of countries and helps political sovereignty as well. But major idea is to really help countries to grow economically and catch up with the Western European countries. One interesting point that was made at the summit is that population of, as Ian mentioned, 111 million, which is about 30% of population, and about same in territory, produces only 19% of GDP of Europe. So growth potential is there. Growth rate is higher than the rest of the Europe. So it's an important element to emphasize that economic development potential needs to be materialized. Some good news is that several projects were mentioned, good news from the perspective of Black Sea countries and countries who want to collaborate with this initiative. First of all, when the initiative was first announced, there were 48 projects included in the list of projects, priority projects of the Three Seas Initiative. And one particular project actually mentioned Ukraine and Georgia. This is a so-called Viking Train project, which connects Baltic Sea to Black Sea via Ukraine, Baltic countries and Ukraine. And actually the project description mentions Ukraine, Georgia, and Azerbaijan actually as a potential collaborative countries who could feed cargo shipments coming from Central Asia and South Caucasus to this railway project. project that was also mentioned at the summit last week was a rail to sea project connecting Constanța to Gdansk. This rail connection could be very, very interesting for all the Black Sea countries because, again, whether it's Ukraine or Georgia or Turkey, cargoes coming from different sources could go to Constanța and then through rail connection reach Northern Europe through Gdansk port in Poland. So clearly important and interesting linkage for countries of Black Sea, non-members of the non-members of the initiative. Another interesting project, obviously, is Danube Black Sea link and potential connectivity through Danube for countries of Black Sea who could use Danube channels to reach different parts of Europe. One interesting idea which President Duda of Poland mentioned is, and actually he was talking about initial ideas of how this Three Seas initiative was actually born. And he mentioned that discussion about natural gas connectivity between two LNG terminals in north and south, one in Poland. Ian can correct my pronunciation, but it's Świnoujście, right? and Kirk Island in Croatia. It's very interesting idea because if you have these two countries, Croatia and Poland, connected through natural gas pipeline, not only natural gas could flow not only from north to south, from Norway's fields through Poland and other countries to Croatia, or through sources of LNG from Poland to Croatia, or vice versa as well, from Kirk to north. And this is exactly the idea of this initiative, as I understand it, to make it easy for countries to diversify their supply lines. This south to north connection is interesting to me personally because of Southern Gas Corridor, which is just about to be start fully functioning in probably in about a month or so, which will bring Azerbaijani gas through Georgia, Turkey, Greece, to Adriatics and then to Italy. And that pipeline, in theory, could be source of supply of gas to that potential pipeline between Croatia and Poland. Another good news that was obviously interesting to hear from the summit. It was about investment fund, larger commitments of different countries. More countries are committed to the fund. And as my understanding is that the US commitment is about $1 billion through the DFC. Actually, it's 1/3 of what other countries will commit. And if other countries will commit, let's say $3 billion, US commitment will be $1 billion. If it goes higher than that, potentially it can grow. But where we stand at this point, US commitment is very essential, very important. Unlike previous predecessor of DFC, OPEC needed US company participation in the project finance process. DFC doesn't require that, and that makes it easier, relatively easier for European companies to be part of the process. One very important element that was mentioned on the summit, which is very, I think, attractive for countries like Ukraine or Georgia and others, is that through this investment fund, actually projects could be funded that are not fully only Three Seas Initiative countries projects. Let's say if there is a project between Romania and Georgia on, let's say, ferry connectivity development or some other kind of connectivity, if it's at least one leg of the project is inside of the Three Seas Initiative countries, project can be funded. So this really opens the opportunity for fund to find interesting projects in the Black Sea region, whether it's energy or transportation, particularly on maritime connectivity in the Black Sea, that can be funded through this initiative. So as somebody mentioned already, unfortunately, there was no clear discussion about potential of increasing members of the initiative, including maybe non-EU members like Ukraine, Georgia, and others. there was some mention by Bulgarian leader of Cyprus and Greece. And Ukraine was mentioned at least a couple of times, Ukraine and Moldova, but no mention of Georgia. But I think this opportunity of potential funding is leaving room open for countries to participate in the projects. One other point I wanted to mention is that I think for going forward, it is essential that three countries of Black Sea, Moldova, Georgia, and Ukraine they have association agreements with the European Union. So they're already in the process of integrating in legal and regulatory environment of the European Union. One of the reasons why countries of 3C initiatives are not very comfortable having additional other participants is about this their membership of one customs union, operating under one regulatory environment, operating under one legal environment. But this fact that countries are in association agreement with the European Union, I think opens this opportunity going forward. I would like to mention like few points that I see potentially important for this 3Cs initiative. First of all, obviously differences are huge, but in a sense, this project reminds me somewhat enlargement of NATO process in 90s and the European Union, in a sense that there was a major European project where United States had greater say and greater support. And in a sense, it created momentum, dynamics of European enlargement, which actually resonated in some other parts of the broader region, which included South Caucasus and Turkey as well. I think pipeline development that emerged through strong support from the United States in 90s and early 2000s, both oil and natural gas pipelines, was somehow impacted by this grander strategy of enlargement of Europe and necessity to supply energy to enlarge Europe. So I think we all need to look at this initiative from that perspective, from the perspective of larger economic project, which can have additions from different sides. And in this particular case, we talk about obviously from the South Caucasus, Ukraine, and even Central Asia, because project of this magnitude and countries of this potential, economic potential already where they are today, but with the growth potential they have, they need both additional resources as well as additional markets. And Central Asia and South Caucasus, with its almost close to 80 million population and maybe even more, and greater resources. So there's a market potential, resources, already some infrastructure elements that are also deepening and progressing that could be connected to this initiative. Just for brief points to make, there are port developments on eastern shores of Caspian Sea. There is a port facility already, very modern port facility near Baku in Azerbaijan. Railway connecting Caspian Sea and Black Sea railway infrastructure is developing, as well as highway infrastructure. I think we are coming to the point where cargo flow from Central Asia to Europe and the Mediterranean will grow exponentially going forward. By the way, last 2 years, even this year, today, a flow of cargo is growing, transit coming from Central Asia to Black Sea and Turkey, even in times of COVID. So potential is there. I would say that a major consideration for 3C initiative should be increasing and enhancing Black Sea connectivity between countries. And that includes obviously Georgia, Ukraine, Turkey, and eastern shore, western shores of Black Sea, Romania, and Bulgaria. Probably I'll stop here and we'll hear if there are any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Mamuka. And just a reminder to our viewers that if you do have a question, please use the Q&A at the bottom. We're going to get into some of those questions shortly, but I'd like to take a little bit of a moderator's prerogative here and ask kind of two broader questions for the audience. One is about, and maybe this is more of a question for Ian, one is about the investment fund and the US participation and commitment of $1 billion. How does that work kind of on the ground? Is it going to be run through DFC, or is there going to be some management participation in the management of the fund by a US representative?
Thanks, Ryan. You know, in February at the Munich Security Conference in Germany, Pompeo made the announcement that the United States was prepared to invest up to $1 billion into the 3Cs initiative, including the initiative's fund and energy projects. At the summit on October 19th, the United States operationalized that commitment by announcing through Undersecretary Keith Crack that the DFC, the U.S. Development Finance Corporation, will invest $300 million into the fund. And that decision will be formalized at a board meeting of the DFC in December. What that means is the United States will basically park $300 million into the fund managed by Amber Infrastructure Group. Essentially, it's really a call. So there'll be $300 million that the fund can call on when it makes its investments. Crack also emphasized that the US $1 billion commitment was still open. So there's $300 million that has been committed to through the DFC to the fund, but that could actually increase up to $1 billion. Because as I understand the law, the DFC can make equity investments into funds like the 3Cs fund up to 1/3 of its value. So when the United States came to the summit, there was just shy of $900 million committed to the fund by the member states. And that's where the $300 million figure came from. If the fund is able to get additional commitments, investments from its member states, from IFIs, from sovereign wealth funds, from private capital around the world, and it increases its size, the United States is willing to increase its investment up to 1/3 of that fund. That's a real commitment. That's real skin in the game. And I have to think that the commitment of US dollars into this fund has got to be a beacon to private capital markets who'll go, whoa, what's going on over here? Because the United States is not just going to waste $300 million. It's going to put $300 million into something that's going to be profitable and it's going to be safe. And that's what I think is the kind of political or geoeconomic significance of this US investment. It's a real signal to the international financial community. Central Europe is a place to make investment, and particularly good and long-term investments are Central European infrastructure.
And we mentioned Russia a lot here, but I mean, there's another power out there, China, who has BRI, Belt and Road Initiative. They have 17+1 in the region. What are your all's perspectives on this project relative to those initiatives, and how do the individual countries kind of work in both camps, so to speak?
You would let me take a shot at that? Yeah, it's a simple choice. I mean, when you are tied into the Belt and Road Initiative, or when you're getting money from Russian entities, be it Russian banks or the so-called private banks, or from the Russian government, you're coming with political strings attached. When you have money that comes in through the 3Cs fund or the 3Cs initiative, it's commercially driven. It's going to go to projects that are going to be viable in the long term. It is money that is managed in a way that ensures, appropriate transparency. And because it's geared toward Central European infrastructure, it's talking about projects that are going to enhance the region's connectivity and the connectivity between the region's countries and the connectivity between the region and a wider Europe. It's all about completing that European market space. So it's good money, it's clean money, it's transparent money, and is geared toward projects that are consistent with the kind of the principles and objectives of the region.
If I may add on that, I've seen a lot of discussion over the last few months, particularly driven by the United States in the, I would say, greater Black Sea region when it comes to Chinese investments and the attitude of BRI countries towards China. And over the last few years, we've seen a lot of promise from China of money and investment in the region that has only very little paid out. We have a case, for instance, there's been some questions on Moldova. A while ago, Moldova tried to get money from the Chinese government, and they realized that their loan is actually more disadvantageous than the loan that they would have received from the European Union and the IMF, even though that comes with political strings attached. So the implementation of that is problematic, as we've seen in cases of Moldova. And I see with, coming back to my initial point, with the United States stepping up in the context of 3Cs initiative, but largely in the Eastern European region, to say, let's give these countries alternatives to invest in critical infrastructure that they desperately need, but in a sustainable manner and in a Western orientated manner, right? With values and regulations and everything that comes with it. So the example that I mentioned earlier with Romania and the $8 billion for the development of its nuclear power plant comes after a story in which initially the Chinese bid on this had won the bid. Pompeo and the United States has stepped in to say that's not really a good idea. The deal was vetoed, and then the United States stepped up with this commitment that is unprecedented for Romania. So I think this is one of the examples that we might see hopefully in the next few months, years, within the 3Cs initiative, and also, as we're discussing, Mamuka mentioned a bit earlier, even as well, how there are possibilities to not limit it to the remits of EU nations, but to expand into the whole transnationally with projects into the whole Eastern European space, where I think we might see, we hope to see alternatives that are being developed by the countries, empowering the countries with the help of the United States, and hopefully also with the help, with the stepping up from the EU in cases like Motor Sich in Ukraine and others, where we hopefully will see a compensation of that, so that over the last few months, particularly in the Black Sea, we've seen kind of a vetoing of China. China is not a good option. This is not sustainable in the long term because these countries need economic development and need foreign investors. But now it's being stepped up with real proposals that are sustainable and transparent and actually add long term to the sustainability of energy connectivity, energy security, and critical infrastructure. So there's few signs that are promising, significant ones, and I think if the 3Cs initiative and the American support will push into the right direction and continue its pressure in a very positive, sustainable manner, then we'll see slowly a compensation of China so far promises, but with the attempt of China, as we've seen in the Black Sea region, to cooperate with these countries to get actually technology, to get access to Western technology through, I would say, unofficial offsets. And so maybe we'll see a positive trend away from that, so that automatically Eastern European countries will rely less on the promise that is not concretized yet, mostly of China, and will compensate with what they actually want, and that is Western investment and cooperation.
Mamuka, did you want to jump in there? I know you had a comment maybe earlier.
Julia made the same point. There was no pushback until a couple of years ago from the United States or anybody else. That's when China's engagement in different parts of the world was growing. Now it's different, and So that's the point. But on the earlier point that Ian made about, I think it's essential to understand that fund is managed by professional management company who actually invested its own money as well in the management. So it's oriented towards profit. It's not a charity organization. It's not like just some spending oriented initiative. It's a commercial initiative, commercial project that's supposed to bring profit on investments. So that's essential to understand.
Yeah, if I could add to that point, I mean, quite literally, these countries' governments are taking their own money, they're parking it under the 3Cs fund and giving up any ability to influence where that money goes. So Poland, which will have invested 750 million euros, cannot call up the fund manager and go, hey, please invest in Baltic Pipe or something in Poland. Fund managers go, thank you for the proposal, I'll look at it, but he will ultimately make his decision on what best serves the profit targets of the fund. So Poland could theoretically not end up with a single investment. That's a risk, but it's a reflection of Poland's and the other countries who have invested in the 3Cs fund in their confidence in the region and their commitment to work together. And I think that is really inspirational. And I think it's also ultimately going to be very profitable.
So just to go to a couple questions from our audience, there's a lot of talk about Russia's response. Last time NATO tried to expand into the region, there was big pushback diplomatically and also militarily from Russia. And I just want to hear your perspectives on what the Russian position is on this project and what potential pitfalls there might be in the future because of this as being seen as a Western push into the region again.
If I may start, just very briefly, I think I don't think the Russians like it, but as we all try to emphasize, this is a commercial project, not a political project. Yes, it has an implicit security dimension and an attempt by some member states of the 3Cs initiative, as well as by the United States, to balance out Russian and Chinese influence. But the track record overall in Eastern Europe since the fall of the Iron Wall has been that this region has remained, whether former Soviet Union or just former communist states has been under development, where the EU has done only so much. And you see attempts of regional development over the last few years that, of course, the Russians do not like, because economic development goes usually hand in hand with democratization. The greater the disparity becomes between developed countries in the former Eastern space and Russia underdeveloped and facing huge economic problems, the less you will have an influence in the long term of Russian malign influence. But again, this topic, this initiative really remains an economical one. So I don't see a scenario likely in which the Russians will get so provoked by a highway that is being built, or LNG ports that are being built, or pipelines, that it will really lean into violent aggression, troops on the ground. But I'm sure that over the next few years, as the 3Cs initiative develops and we'll see some of the projects actually implemented and concretized, that there's going to be a lot of pushback, a lot of undermining in the media, and questioning, as we've seen Russia, not just in the Eastern space, but all over Western Europe and the United States, has built over the last few years the ability to tailor its disinformation, to cater to the beliefs or disinformation that people are prone to in different regions, in different countries. So I'm sure as projects will become concretized on the ground, implemented, that we'll see a lot of pushback. But there is no way that either Russia or China for that matter, can compete with critical infrastructure development, with the technology that we have already in Eastern Europe, that we have access to via Western Europe, via the United States, to be able to really start a great power competition in terms of who develops the region more. So I think we'll see a lot of pushback, but I'm hoping this will be limited.
I'll just add, if Moscow is seeking hegemony, they won't like 3 Cs. Moscow is interested in mutual prosperity that comes through infrastructure development. They'll further connect the region. In fact, because of the regions bordering Russia, connect Russia to a wider Europe, they should embrace it.
So I think we would be remiss if we didn't recognize that a week from today is the US presidential election. And, Georgia also has elections on Saturday. Obviously, this has been a very important part of the Trump administration's strategy in the region, reinforcing this project, empowering Eastern and Central European countries. In a hypothetical Biden administration, is this an important part of that? How do you see Trump 2 administration building on this? And if Biden is to be elected next week, how would this transition to his administration and potentially the energy side, thinking about, rejoining the Paris Accords and the European Green Deal?
Yeah. Muko, you want to try, or should I give a shot?
Go ahead.
U.S. objectives in support for 3 Cs are really bipartisan. It's fundamentally about completing the vision of Europe's undivided whole, free, and secure. It's about leveraging private capital to further economic development. It's about enhancing the economic prosperity of our closest allies. It's about strengthening their economic resilience in a world that's increasingly economically volatile. Those are bipartisan objectives. Those are the objectives that have driven the Trump administration to support 3 Cs and to embrace it. I'm confident that a Biden administration will do the same. And my confidence is not just aspirational, but over the fact that we have a 3 Cs resolution awaiting passage in the House of Representatives. This 3 Cs resolution was introduced by Representative Marcy Kaptur, a Democrat, and Representative Adam Kinzinger, a Republican. And it has 41 co-sponsors, almost evenly divided between Republicans and Democrats. It sailed through the House Foreign Affairs Committee and now sits on the House floor awaiting passage. That's a pretty good reflection of bipartisan support. And I've also been happy to see that a number of senior Biden advisors have written positively about 3 Cs. So I'm optimistic that a Biden administration, if that's what comes to be after next week, will sustain U.S. support for 3 Cs. But ultimately, U.S. support for 3 Cs is going to be driven by Central European commitment to this initiative. It is their initiative. They launched it. They're leading it. They provided the initial capital. If they continue that momentum or increase it, it's only logical the United States will sustain, if not increase, its support for the initiative.
On that note, I think I would just reinforce it, because if countries, regional countries and regions themselves come to Washington with a one voice and talk to U.S. administration, whichever administration is there, in one voice, chances are much higher that they will get greater U.S. support. And I think this is my advice to countries like Georgia, Ukraine, and others who are interested to join this initiative. They need to constantly talk to 3 Cs initiative leadership in all the countries individually, but also to talk to United States government as well, to again, in one voice and with some clear ideas of strategy, how these countries could join this initiative, where they can contribute to the positive manner, and what type of positive, commercially viable projects they could offer to those funding institutions that are created under the initiative.
And just briefly to add to that, a bit away from US elections and how they're being seen in the region, we've issued a report on that just last week with MEI. But we've had elections now in Ukraine. We have elections in Georgia. We have elections in Moldova in 2 rounds. And all of them are very differentiated. While with Georgia, I would argue that we can be relaxed. It's going to be pro-Western anyway. With Moldova, there's a track record of East versus West orientation. And in Ukraine, there's potential for that too, and far more complicated. So just to reiterate a bit or piggyback off of what Mamuka just said, I think it will depend a lot on them to extend their willingness and their interest in investing into this, including from my perspective with the political and security message that this is a project that diversifies away from a line for an influence, whether China or Russia. And we do have, I rain on the parade of the Europeans and how they manage this in my opening remarks, but we do see building up momentum in the European Union. Germany has been hard to get on board within the 3 Seas initiative. Now they've asked for a membership status, which has so many intricacies, but we see a little bit within Western Europe of strategy or more of an anti-Russian policy in the context of energy infrastructure and so on. In Germany, with hacks from Russia, in Norway with hacks from Russia, with Navalny, with Belarus. So there is momentum building up potentially in Western Europe. And of course, the more Western Europe buys into this initiative, the more greater support it will get, right? The more buy-ins, the better it is. So in the greater security and political environment that we have right now, whether a new Trump administration or a first Biden administration, I think there's a lot of things to be aware of in the years to come. But I think momentum is building up. The summit this year, recently a few days ago, has been a good sign of further investment, major buy-ins, and so let's hope that we'll keep it going, or it will keep itself going with a further expansion into the region.
Thanks, Julia. We have so many questions that I apologize. We're probably not going to get to them all, but I just wanted to give the opportunity for some final closing remarks from our panelists, if anybody has some points, from our discussion that they would like to make.
I guess I just suggest, looking forward for 3 Seas, what are some of the priorities? One, I would say, is that the 3 Seas nations really should create a secretariat that's a full-time, 24/7 secretariat based in a West European capital, where the money is, Berlin, Brussels, or London. Because if there's one handicap that 3 Seas has right now, it's kind of iterative. There's one summit, one web forum each year, and then kind of silence or a bunch of governmental engagements over the course of the year. A full-time secretariat would help market this initiative, engage the different capital markets, engage all the different conferences, both policy conferences and financial and sectoral conferences that are necessary to get the word out about the economic vibrancy of the region, the 3 Seas region, and the infrastructure opportunities that are there. It could also serve as kind of a warehouse for all the different infrastructure projects now underway or even that are potential. That would be very, very useful. Second is to continue the expansion of the 3 Seas Fund's capital base. They've now crossed this important mark. They crossed over $1 billion, and now they need to continue driving forward to the $3 to $5 billion mark. That's going to need a more aggressive approach by Amber Capital, but also by the governments of the 3 Seas out to sovereign wealth funds, to the IFIs, and to private capital, which ultimately is the target. A third objective is to really transform German and European Commission support into something that's tangible. Right now, it's rhetoric. It would be great to see German equivalent of the DFC invest in the fund. it would be great to get the EC, the European Commission, to encourage the EBRD, the European Bank, and such, European Central Bank, to invest in the 3Cs fund. Those are objectives that I think ought to be, defining the next 12 months of the 3Cs. And then, of course, more aggressive outreach into private capital markets, because that's what it's all about.
I would just say one sentence, probably. I think it's the United States, since 90s, invested significant amount of capital, both political as well as financial capital, in development of the, obviously in Eastern Europe, Central Eastern Europe, but also to South Caucasus and Central Asia, by supporting those pipelines we mentioned earlier, oil and gas pipelines and some other infrastructure projects. So there's a significant investments, and I think it's an interest of obviously United States to build these linkages between all those areas of partner countries and allies, between starting from Central Asia all the way to Poland and Northern Europe, building this, I would call it economic belt and economic crescent of cooperating countries with enough degree of connectivity that could support greater trade, greater transit, greater transportation, and greater collaboration between countries. So I think it's in the interest of the United States to continue supporting this initiative.
And then maybe one just very quick word from me. I'm more or less repeating what the other speakers have said, but from a political and security perspective, I think that the United States over the last year, particularly with real projects on the ground and support, has stepped up enormously. It's been a big win in terms of, it was portrayed like that a bit in the media as hearts and minds, but hearts and minds in Eastern Europe have been on the American side for a long time, but they do need reinforcement. So the fact that the United States becomes present with major buy-ins in an equal manner with Eastern Europeans supporting them has been a real step up. And I think the most important thing to be able to keep the momentum going beyond private, enhancing private partnership possibilities and making it more visible for countries who want to buy in outside the EU remit, outside the 3Cs initiative members, is to actually something that the United States has been rhetorically supporting, particularly in the case of Romania, but in others as well over the last few months, that regional powers, many powers like Poland, like Romania, should step up now to become more active within the 3Cs initiative to support smaller countries around them, or countries that are not within the EU and NATO and face conflicts and face major infrastructure destruction because of the conflict and because of the suspended state that they are in with separatist territories and all of that. The fact that we see now a bit of a building of networking between governments, and with the support, Poland stepping up for Ukraine, maybe Romania will step up for Moldova and perhaps for Georgia. I think these kinds of even rhetorical support will help significantly build the 3Cs initiative into something even bigger than it is right now. So that's something to watch out and to support. But other than that, I think we conclude that it's been a great summit, and we look forward to more 3Cs initiative.
Yeah, I think one key takeaway is that as we emerge from this coronavirus pandemic, we're going to need as many private and public resources as we can to jumpstart growth in any way we can. And, economic growth and prosperity is going to be critical in the next couple of years in order to make up some of the losses that we've seen. And the future of kind of U.S. economic policy abroad is going to be placing itself in those networks, reinforcing the standards and the values that the U.S. has. And so I think this initiative is a great way, a great stepping stone towards that future. I want to just take a moment and thank the three panelists that we had today. I think this has been a fantastic discussion. I know we're all kind of virtually clapping in our own living rooms. So I just want to thank you all for being with us today. You can learn more about the work that we're doing at Frontier Europe on MEI's website, mei.edu. We welcome you to engage with us and to read more about our perspectives and our work. And with that, I'd like to close with just thanks again to our panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan.